Hello and welcome to the Philip Mason Show, where acquiring wisdom is king and pursuing education is a lifelong adventure. I'm your host, Philip Mason. I'm delighted to have this time with you today, my friend, as we dive into episode number 9. So, today we're going to talk more in detail about the first steps to wisdom. There are 10 steps and here they are. I'm just going to go ahead and run through them so you're familiar with them in case you haven't seen some of my other videos. So, first of all, there is humble yourself. That's number one. That's the first step to wisdom. Number two is a willingness to learn. Number three is to be believing. Number four is to pivot in faith. Number five is to deny yourself. Number six is to lift others. Number seven, live by virtue and truth. Number eight, be inquisitive. Number nine, develop your talents. And last but not least is number 10, build a happy family. These are all put into a very purposeful order here, all designed to help you progress towards becoming a person of wisdom. So these are the first 10 steps to wisdom, and they're very basic to developing and acquiring wisdom in your life. There are many more steps after these initial ones, but this foundation, if we don't start here, it can lead us to foolishness and we can be faulty in our judgment. So, in this episode, we're actually going to talk about step number 4, pivot in faith. There's some interesting words that were written by Blaise Pascal, the famous French scientist, and he also did a little bit of his own philosophy into morality and into Christian writing. And he wrote some really profound things. I'm just kind of generalizing here, but Pascal said that that reason is a tool and not a foundation. So, in other words, reasoning can help us clear the ground, but it won't help us build the structure. We have to have a willingness to engage and a willingness to work through things. And when we gain new information, we have to be able to use that and to use it to build that home, so to speak. And he also said something else that I think is really interesting. He said people are generally better persuaded by the reasons which they themselves have discovered than by those which have come into the mind by others. So what's he saying there? So he's basically saying, as human beings, like human nature is when someone hands us the truth on a silver platter, or just in a classroom presents it, or we just read it in a book and it's just given to us straight as a principle or as a law or as as a piece of truth, we're more likely to reject it or not to value it very much. However, when we put some effort into our exploration and we're looking for truth and we're searching for it and we're putting effort into it, we're taking action on it, and then we discover it, then it becomes very valuable to us and we seize upon it and we treasure it. It becomes very precious to us. And so that's an interesting phenomenon. And as an amateur teacher and as a professional teacher, this is something that I've noticed over and over again. And it's something that I've noticed in myself. And it's something that can actually prevent us from gaining wisdom. It's also something that, if we use it wisely, can help us make sure that we become wise. And so this is an interesting phenomenon. Now, in today's modern society, here in the United States of America, many of us, sadly, we learn on we learn on systems that are force fed or a spoon fed learning system, which has its advantages for sure, but it also can. It's easy for us to become numb to new knowledge. That's because a lot of times it's presented to us in very plain, unentertaining, not very enjoyable circumstances. It's just given to us. It's like getting a really plain TV dinner when you could be having a nice home cooked meal that's fresh and very nicely seasoned and prepared. Part of the challenge with that is when we're force fed or spoon fed in our learning systems, there's no activity, there's no effort on our part to discover that truth that's being presented to us. So there can be some boredom that happens from being part of a repetitive educational system. It can dull our senses. Now, we can choose to push back on that and not allow that to happen. And this becomes more easy for us when we understand that we're beings who are actors. And we truly learn something when we act. and when we have to act upon the knowledge we've been given and then put it into practice. And that's how we cultivate wisdom. To use a little bit of analogy here, if you think of yourself being on a path and that path before you may be a little rocky, it may be uncertain, it's dark, maybe you're traveling at night. If you find a new way to produce light, or if new light emerges that illuminates the path before you, creates an excitement. It creates hope, and that path becomes more visible to you, and you become more confident in the direction that you're traveling. And wisdom is helping us to implement the new knowledge that we get in a good and wholesome way that helps us become a better person. And really our path of life is like that. And the more light that we get, the more it's illuminated, the better we're able to become a better person. And that becomes very desirable to us. We thirst after it, we hunger after it, and it becomes a precious treasure to us because of that discovery and that effort that we had to put into it before we received that illumination. So one of our challenges here is in that process of learning and appreciation is finding a way to implement new knowledge as soon as possible so that it becomes useful wisdom to us, regardless of how it's presented to us. That's faith. And faith is an action word. When you learn something new, you know, you're exercising mental and physical exertion to put it into motion. First it's mental and then it's physical. So for example, as a teacher, I enjoy teaching economics, philosophy, history, government. I'm also an entrepreneur, and I understand very clearly that the business sector in society plays a very vital role to the health of our society. And it also plays a very vital role in these four important areas of study that any student may undertake. Now, there is a common cultural belief that is being promoted in America, and it's been promoted in America for well over 100 years now, and it's gradually becoming louder and louder in American society. So, this cultural belief is that free enterprise or business enterprises of one's own free choice is evil because people seek their own interests, their own self interest. And because they are making money and profiting on their business ventures, they don't have the best interests of society at heart. And therefore, government should step in and take those profits from them so they aren't so greedy and redistribute it to the masses who are unselfish and have chosen not to pursue their own self interest. It's the profits are evil mindset, or the money is evil mindset that I'm referring to, and it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. But in a nutshell, that's kind of what people oftentimes say, and what they do, and what the government does. Now, there is a famous University of Chicago economics professor, Professor Milton Friedman, who's won many awards. There's a long list, like the Nobel Prize, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the National Medal of Science, the John Bates Clark Medal, and other awards for his work in economics and statistics. And he's very much a genius in many respects. And a lot of what Milton Friedman did was during his time, he was being attacked by a lot of people in government or those in different parties who wanted to see socialism and see communism become a part of the United States government, or literally to change the government. And so he pushed back on that, and he gave a lot of good economic reasons why that's not feasible and why we shouldn't do that as Americans. And which is kind of interesting because Friedman grew up, you know, his background is in Eastern Europe where they experienced communism. So he knows from firsthand experience through wisdom that, you know, these principles that the socialists and the communists love to promote in our country, they don't actually work. They're not practical. They're not make people satisfied and happy like they claim it does. So Friedman, one of the things that he says is that businesses run on self-interest, and that businesses only exist if it makes a profit. So this is a mathematical statement that he's making. You know, there's a very clear law here. Businesses are strictly money-making institutions, and economies prosper when each individual seeks their own self-interest. So that's something that he often states, but he's oftentimes criticized for this in the media and the press. And some of my own students that I have in economics class, they criticize this line of thinking. But the reality is he's just stating a law. He's stating a law that defines what a business is. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Now, some of my students and those in the media will attack these truths and they'll declare him to be selfish, immoral, and unprincipled, is oftentimes what they leveled at him. And, when I teach a lot of these principles in my economics class or even in my history class or in a government class, when I directly address these concerns that these students raise by plainly stating the laws and principles of economics and entrepreneurship, they often attack me with the same claim that I am selfish and greedy and not a moral person, much like they did Milton Friedman, which I think is very interesting. And so it raises a question of why do these intelligent people think that? Now, it's kind of interesting as a teacher, if I take a different approach and I don't directly just hand them the principle of the law of economics or of government, of good government, and just present it to them straightforward in a straightforward manner. Um, but I take more of a circuitous route and give them the opportunity to discover truth for themselves, I don't get so much pushback from these particular students. And it's interesting. So there's a couple different ways I can go about this. One of the ways I've done this is by giving them an opportunity to brainstorm their own business ideas. So if they may get in a group and they may have to come up with what their business is going to be. Now, as a group, a lot of times they run into the problems of agreeing on what that business should do to earn money. And it's because they all have different interests and they all want to pursue their own interests. There's other times where I'll have them read history accounts of World War II and they learn about socialist dictators or communist dictators who took away the rights of the people to own businesses. Or sometimes I have them read stories of governments that start to fail because they don't have enough tax revenues because businesses have failed due to their own government's bad policies. So once students start to study and they start to learn on their own, or they start to do simulations that help them understand how a business runs and is function and how a government runs and is functions, they start to develop some intuition as to what the truth of the matter is. And they understand more clearly what the realities are to this situation, having not had much experience in their own lifetime. So I don't have to put the principle or the law on a platter and just serve it to them directly, which is sometimes what I've done, and I've gotten a lot of pushback from some of those students. But when they use their own tuition in when they use their own intuition and they read through these studies, these studies and these stories, and have these own simulation experiences, they start to have this willingness to understand that things may not always be as they seem. And they may be able to instinctively know that there's a law or principle here that, when violated, it actually destroys human freedom and actually destroys the ability of that business to function. And so they discover it on their own and they willingly accept this principle or law that previously, when I had just given it to them straight, they had actually rejected it. So interesting phenomenon. Now, unfortunately, there seems to be in some classes always a very small number of students who will still hold on to their previous knowledge and they're not willing to pivot in faith when presented with new truths because of some emotional attachment or it could be a political party belief or whatever it is that they feel allegiance to that prevents them from acquiring this new wisdom. So let me share with you, I'm just going to state a few pieces of wisdom that oftentimes I share in my classes and with my students. And I want you to just kind of think about your initial reaction to them. What's your gut feeling on them? What's been your experience with them? What are your beliefs surrounding these pieces of wisdom that to me are very precious and have caused me to pivot in faith and be able to realize, oh, there's a better way of doing things here. And that truth is truth and it stays the same and doesn't change at all. So I'm going to go through a series of statements here, some pieces of wisdom here in these four areas of study in history and business and in government and in economics. So I'm just going to state these. And this is wisdom. Some of it's, wisdom that Milton Friedman taught. So here's wisdom. There is a natural law of business that defines the operation of a business. The law, as stated, is a venture becomes a business when your revenues exceed your expenses and a profit is achieved. So, hence, that's the definition of what a business is. A business owes its existence to profit. Businesses go out of existence when there is no profit or not enough profit. Even today, where we have a huge rise in nonprofit organizations, those organizations, in order for them to grow or to continue to exist, they have to turn a profit to remain in business and to fulfill their mission. Basically, we do some changes in names and semantics here is what we do, is basically what the government does. So basically, they rename their profit. They call it savings for the future or future budget funds or surplus funds for reinvestment, whatever they want to label it. So they're essentially taking that money and they're investing it back in the organization so it can do what? Well, so it can better serve its clientele and the mission and further expand its reach. So any business organization, whether it's profit or nonprofit or for profit, essentially has to do that. Otherwise, they won't be along or be around for very long. All right, here's another piece of wisdom. Self interest and morality can coexist in a business. Let me read that one more time. Self interest and morality can coexist in a business. A lot of the argument today that we hear in the media and among people on social media is that if you're seeking your self interest, you're selfish and you're making all that money in a greedy way. And of course, self-interest and morality can coexist in a business is something that's been proved for over thousands of years of human history. There's tons of examples of very moral businessmen who have done great good in pursuing their own self-interest. All right, here's another piece of wisdom. Self-interest and selfishness can be two separate things, morally speaking. Self-interest can be a good thing as it motivates you to have a roof over your head and food in your stomach and provide for the needs and wants of your employees. On the other hand, selfishness is bad because it may motivate you to take away something that rightfully belongs to someone else or to gain an unfair advantage over someone else by bending the law. So self-interest and selfishness can actually be two separate things, particularly in a moral sense. All right, here's another piece of wisdom. In a free enterprise system, you run the risk that some businesses will behave immorally or unethically. On the other hand, the upside is that you'll have a system that grows rapidly where most of the businesses will do what is right because it benefits them and satisfies their self interest. And it helps lift society because they're also benefiting the client or the customer. All right, here's another piece of wisdom. Businesses allow people to produce profits that allow them to be self reliant, reducing the strain and burden on families, churches, nonprofit organizations, communities, and governments for the care of the individual. Wow, that's a piece of wisdom. I'll read it one more time. Businesses allow people to produce profits that allow them to be self reliant, thereby reducing the strain and burden on families, churches, nonprofit organizations, communities, and governments for the care of the individual. If everyone had an opportunity to run a business and there weren't very many regulations, it actually provides a wonderful opportunity for people to take care of themselves rather than organizations or governments having to do it. Here's wisdom. Government structures such as socialism and communism reduce freedom and economic activity to the point that people lose the desire to be productive, self reliant, and self fulfilled individuals. Instead, these government structures produce contention, war, debt, bankruptcy, political party polarisms, loss of human rights. These are all the fruits of these types of government systems and structures. All right. So there is a list of wisdoms from Milton Friedman that I'm sharing with you. And I, I include them as my own pieces of wisdom too, because I've taught them for so long and they belong to me as much as they do to Milton at this point. But I hope this has given you some food for thought. When we receive new information or new truths, are we willing to evaluate them? Are we willing to use the tool of reason to clear the ground, as Pascal says, and to start building that house with new information and being able to, as we build that house, to test its integrity, and if it withstands the rigors of weather and of time and of other forces, is it a good house? Yeah, it is a good house. And therefore, we've discovered wisdom. We've discovered that these principles hold up over time. They hold up to other forces, and they produce a good result, which is a house to live in, to extend our metaphor there. So when we pivot in faith, we may cherish previously held beliefs, just like my students have that cherished belief that businessmen are selfish people and they go out there to seek their own aggrandizement, and they gather in all of this evil money and they use it and they take it from others at the expense of others, and they only do it for the benefit of themselves. And that's kind of the myth that's out there that I hear oftentimes. When in reality, that business cannot succeed or operate unless it is helping and lifting and blessing the lives of those that its products and services are designed to help. People aren't going to part with their money, or even if they're trading, they're not going to part with their own goods if there's not something that that business has that they want, right? So if I'm hungry and if I go to a bakery, I want their bread because it's going to satisfy my hunger. And that's a good thing. And I'm grateful that that bakery's there because now I'm not hungry anymore and I can continue to live. And and if that bakery's not doing the right thing, if they're baking bread that's poor quality and has low nutrition in it, and maybe they're using chemicals in their bread that aren't the best, I have the freedom to go to some other bakery and to choose that bakery that produces good, wholesome bread. Or I can even go home and make my own bread. I can grind my own wheat and raise my own bread and put it in the oven and bake it and enjoy it when it's hot and fresh. I have that freedom to do that. I can have my own industry at home. And so that's the beauty of a free enterprise system, is that all people can seek their own best self-interest in the situation, while at the same time benefiting others around them. Whereas if you have a government system like a socialist system or a communist system, you have some people at the top who determine how all of us should benefit from economic systems or from businesses. And that just never works out well because all of our self interests never get addressed and we all have needs that go neglected. And so it's very unfortunate. So I hope these have been really helpful examples of wisdom that I've thought many hours upon, and I've spent a lot of time teaching my students about. And thanks be to Pascal for his wisdom, and also to Milton Friedman for his wisdom. And I hope, like Friedman and like Pascal, we can all pivot in faith. When we discover new truth, we have a willingness to adapt it and to adjust to it and to act upon it so we can discover its truthfulness. It has been a privilege and a blessing to be with you today. I've really enjoyed our time together. I would challenge you this week to go out and to think about, as you're gathering new information and new ideas, to evaluate them and to test them. And if they are good, act on them. And as you act on them, you'll continue to receive more evidence that they are good. And continue to keep those principles in your life and to act on them and to put them into implementation into your daily activities. And you will discover new wisdom if you do that. And that's my promise to you. Thank you again for this time. I hope you've enjoyed episode number 9. I'm your host, Philip Mason, and this is the Philip Mason Show, and we'll catch you on the next episode.